Hello students, today we are going to study the third part of the story, The Cop and the Anthem. This is the last section of the chapter in which we find Soapy trying out different methods of going to the Blackwell prison. But here also, on both the occasion, he fails yet again. As the chapter ends, we find Soapy in a complete change of mind. He wants to stand up as a man once again and live an honest and hard-working life. It is only in the last stanzas or stages of the lesson we find when Soapy has decided to stand firm as an honest man. He is suspected of foul play by a cop, arrested and sent to the Blackwell prison. So let's start the third part of this story. In the third part of the story, we are going to discuss about few points which are written in the book. Soapy tries his luck twice again, but cops remain indifferent as ever. Soapy is suddenly reminded of his childhood home and mother and resolved to turn over a new leaf. Feeling a hand on his arm, Soapy turns around to see the broad face of a cop. Now I am going to read. Then he came to another cop standing in front of a big theater. He thought of something else to try. He began to shout as if he had too much to drink. His voice was as loud as he could make it. He danced, he cried out. And the cop turned his back to Soapy and said to a man standing near him, "It's one of those college boys. He won't hurt anything. We have orders to let them shout." Soapy was quiet. Was no cop going to touch him? He began to think of the island as if it were as far away as a star. He pulled his thin coat around him. The wind was very cold. Then he saw a man in a shop buying a newspaper. The man's umbrella stood beside the door. Soapy stepped inside the shop, took the umbrella, and walked slowly away. The man followed him quickly. "My umbrella," he said. "Oh, is it?" said Soapy. "Why don't you call a cop?" "I took it. Your umbrella? Why don't you call a cop? There is one standing corner at the corner." The man walked more slowly. Soapy did the same, but he had a feeling that he was going to fail again. The cop looked at the two men. "I," said the umbrella man. "That is, how these things happen. If that's your umbrella, I am very sorry. I found it this morning in a restaurant. If you say it's yours, I hope you will." "It's mine," cried Soapy with anger in his voice. The umbrella man hurried away. The cop helped a lady across the street. Soapy walked east. He threw the umbrella as far as he could throw it. He talked to himself about cops and what he thought of them, because he wished to be arrested. They seemed to believe he was like a king who could do no wrong. Now here you can see a incident. You can see a new incident. Soapy moved along and reached another area of big city. And slowly walking along, he reached a place where stood a big theater where all the rich and respected gentry of the city used to visit to spend some good time. And they did not want to be bothered by anyone here. Now Soapy was here. All his previous plans had been falling apart and he desperately something to work for him. Suddenly, he had a different kind of plan in his mind. He thought that if he acted like a drunkard in front of a respected crowd, he would surely be arrested and sent to jail. Suddenly, he began to shout at the top of his voice. He even sang songs and started dancing and doing all kind of weird actions and behavior in order to upset the people all around. This went on for some time, and to Soapy's surprise, no one seemed to be disturbed by his foolish act. A cop was also standing nearby who seemed least bothered and was watching Soapy. He turned to another man standing beside him and said to him that Soapy was just another college boy who would not harm anyone. We have been ordered not to be anything to the college boys, even if they behave a little rude. So again, the cop was not taking any interest in Soapy, which was so disturbing for his future plan. The Blackwell prison seemed far away from his reach. All his plans were falling apart. He could not reach the Blackwell prison. If things like this kept coming up, it was getting cold. His thin coat was not going to keep out the cold this winter. After a little while, as he moved on, he reached a shop and saw a person purchasing a new paper while his umbrella was kept beside the door of the shop. Soapy again decided to try out another plan of stealing an umbrella and in event getting the much needed punishment. So in order to work out the plan, he moved ahead and picked up the umbrella and started walking away from the shop. Soon a person stepped out from the shop and came up to Soapy in a hesitant voice, asked for the umbrella which Soapy was carrying. Here you can see. Soapy was all ready to create a scene which would eventually put him in the prison. Soapy asked, this umbrella belongs to you? Yes, I had picked it from the shop. If you want it back, why don't you call the cop to help you get it back from me? That person was surprised at Soapy's behavior. Why don't you call this the cop? Is standing at the corner of the and the cop is standing at the corner of the street. The cop was watching Soapy and others man activity from the corner of the street, but in no way wanted to interfere with them. After a little while, the person with the newspaper told Soapy in a hesitant tone that the umbrella did not really belong to him. Rather, he picked it up from a restaurant which he visited this morning. I'm not sure who really owned it. If you say that the umbrella is yours, so gladly keep it with you. I do not need it anymore. The umbrella is with the rightful owner, so let it be so. Soapy was angry and cried out to the person that the umbrella belongs to him. Seeing Soapy agitated, and man quickly moved away from Soapy. The cop paid no attention to the whole affair. He was busy helping an old lady in crossing the road. Now, here we can see at last Soapy come to the quiet street on the side of the city. He turned here and began to walk south towards the Madison Square. He was going home, although home was only a seat in a park. But at very quiet corner, Soapy stopped. Here was his old childhood home. Through one window, he could see a soft light shining that had been his living room, where he had spent many happy, peaceful moments. Sweet music came to Soapy's ears and seemed to hold him there. The moon was above, peaceful and bright. There were few people passing. He could hear birds high above him, and the music that came from the room held Soapy there, for he had known it well long ago. In those days, his life contained such things as mother and flowers and high hopes and friends and clean thoughts and clean clothes. There was a sudden and wonderful change in his soul. He saw with sick fear how he had fallen. He saw his worthless days, his wrong desires, his dead hopes, the lost power of his mind. And also, in a moment, his heart answered this change in his soul. He would fight to change his life. He would pull himself up out of his mud. He would make a man of himself again. Soapy moved away from the spot and started walking in the eastern direction, going to another part of the city. He was very confused and angry at the same time. He kept wondering what has got into the cops of the city, who were not ready to arrest him, despite of all the unlawful acts that he has committed in the past 24 hours. He threw away the umbrella as far as he could, which he had been carrying for some time, and which was of no use to him. Not being arrested, he thought of himself as a king who could do no wrong, a person who is always right, and not cop ever dared to lay hands on him. So he kept walking along from one street to another, and unknowingly he had returned back to the Madison Square. He was planning to going home, and to Soapy, the bench of the Madison Square Park was his home. This section of the chapter show how pathetic or sad Soapy's condition was, because though unknowingly he was walked forward, the place which deep inside him he thought of as his home, the bench, the beach in Madison's Park. As he was walking towards the park, he stopped at the corner of the street and standing there gazed at the building just in front of him, which was once his childhood home, where he had spent such a good time, happy and peaceful moment. He saw soft light in one of the upper room, which one used to be his living room. Sound of sweet music reached his ears, and he was so overcome by the sweet sound that he just stood still in what very place for some time. All the wonderful and peaceful thoughts of the good old days when he used to live in that house kept coming into his mind. How peaceful and bright those good years were, he wondered. He remembered his mother, who would provide everything for him in those days. He remembered about all his friends and all the good thing he had at his disposal. Everything was now a dream. He was remembering about the good old days. He realized how low his esteem has fallen. He started thinking of his worthlessness, his wrong desires and dead hopes, which have persuaded him to the find peace in a place which is known as the Blackwell jail. How bad his whole personality has turned up. He has completely lost the positive approach to his life. It was time to be positive now. Suddenly, all the good thoughts filled it in Soapy. A fresh spark of returning back to the good old life where he would earn his respect and all the good things which can easily be attained by hard work and honesty. Soapy was now ready to fight back the gloominess, the, the demoralizing, dishonest, and despairing thoughts which concluded his mind. He was ready to fight for himself, and by pulling himself from the dirty, muddy life, was ready to make a man of himself once again. Now let's move to the last section of this story. There was time he was young enough. He would find his old purpose in life and follow it. That sweet music had changed him. Tomorrow he would find work. A man had once offered him a job. He would find that man tomorrow. He would be somebody in the world. He would. Soapy felt a hand on his arm. He looked quickly around into the broad face of a cop. "What are you doing? Hanging around here?" asked the cop. "Nothing," said Soapy. "You think I believe that?" said the cop. Full of his new strength, Soapy began to argue. And it is not wise to argue with the New York cop. "Come along," said the cop. 3 months prison on Blackwell's Island, said the judge to Soapy next morning. Now I am going to explain. Soapy now thought of himself. He asserted that he was young and had time on his side. He could work wonders if he wished. He will find a good job for himself, and by earning money and respect for himself, he would once again try to live a respectful life in the society. He remembered about a man who once had offered a job to him. Soapy thought he could always visit him and ask for a job. Yes, surely he will visit that person tomorrow and try to make a work for himself in the society. As he was planning and thinking all this, standing in front of the house, a cop had been watching Soapy, who was standing there for some time now. The cop felt suspicious of Soapy. because he had been in front of a house just staring at the building as if planning to steal or something unlawful. The cop reached out his hand on Soapy's shoulder and catching him inquired why he was standing here. Soapy was not going to give in to the cop, rather, he started to argue with him that he was standing here with no wrong intentions. But the cop was not convinced by the argument which was put before him by Soapy. He was arrested on the suspicion of planning to steal and was produced before the judge the very next morning. And after hearing the case, the judge sentenced Soapy their 3 months of imprisonment at the Blackwell prison. In the last section of the chapter, we find an incarnation of event, or you can say the ironical turn of event. When Soapy wanted something very intently for himself, it kept shipping out of his hand or skipping out of his hand. But when Soapy decided to stand up for his own good and life, an honest life, he is caught up but his destiny and thrown into the prison to live a life which is devoid of all moral respect. He gets what he always wanted to have at the time when he needed it the least. This is the wonderful story of O. Henry and very inspiring also. Let's solve the exercises which are based on this chapter. Answer the following question. What are some of the signs of approaching winter referred to in the text? To find the answer, we just move to the text. Here you can see a dead leaf fell at Soapy's feet. That was a special sign for him that winter was coming. It was time for all who lived in Madison Square to prepare. Soapy's mind now realized that fact. The time had come. He had to find some way to take care of himself during the cold winter weather. And therefore he moved restlessly on his seat. People want new warm clothes, and Soapy moves restlessly on his seat in the park. Now, some of the signs of approaching winter referred to in the text are birds begin to fly. In the very first stanza, you can see the certain sign to show that winter is coming. Birds begin to fly south, and people want new warm coats and dead leaves falling. Now, here we can see some sign of winter is coming. Birds begin to fly to south, and a dead leaf falling, and you see the signs of the winter restlessly. Some of the signs of the approaching winter referred to in the text are birds begin to fly south, people want new warm coats, and dead leaves falling. Now let's move to the second question. Write true or false against each of the following. Soapy did not want to go to prison. Is it false or true? It is false. Now, second, Soapy had been to prison several times. True. Third, it was not possible for Soapy to survive in the city through the winter. This is false. Soapy hated to answer question of personal nature. True. So first is false, second is true, third is false, and fourth is true. Now let's move to the question number 3. What was Soapy's first plan? Why did it not work? For answer the question, we can move to the text. Now here you can see Soapy's first plan was to go and have a good dinner at some fine restaurant. He would then say that he had no money to pay, and then a cop would be called. It would all be done very quietly. The cop would arrest him. He would be taken to the judge. The judge would do the rest. It did not work because as he put his foot inside the restaurant door, the head waiter saw his broken old shoes and the torn clothes that covered his legs. Strong and ready hands turned Soapy around and moved him quietly and quickly outside again. Now let's move to the next question. The next question is, but the cop mind would not consider Soapy. What did the cop not consider and why? Now here you can see always cop was standing aside but never interrupt the Soapy's mission. The cop minds would not consider Soapy because according to the cop, men who break windows do not stop there to talk to cop. They run away as fast as they can. But Soapy stood right there looking friendly and happy. The cop, however, saw another man further along the street running and he ran after him. Now let's move to the next question. Next question is, we have orders to let them shout. What is the policeman referring to? We have orders to let them shout. The policeman is referring to the orders that the college boys should not be arrested but allowed to shout as they would not hurt anyone. In the third incident, you can see we have ordered to let them shout. The policeman is referring to the orders that the college boys should not be arrested but allowed to shout as they would not hurt anyone. Now let's move to the next question. Write true or false against each of the following. Soapy stole a man's umbrella. Is it true or false? This is true. The owner of the umbrella offered to give it to Soapy. False. The man had stolen the umbrella that was now Soapy's. Soapy threw away the umbrella. True. Now, first is true, second is false, third is true, and last is also true. Now, let's move to the question number 7. There was a sudden and wonderful change in his soul. What brought about the change in Soapy? After watching that house where he lived in his childhood, there was a sudden and wonderful change in his soul. It was brought about when Soapy saw his old childhood home. Through the window, he saw a light shining and heard sweet music that sounded familiar to him. He had spent many happy, peaceful moments there when his life contained such things as mother's flowers, high hopes, friends, clean thoughts, and clean clothes. He then saw with sick fear how he had fallen. He saw worthless days, his wrong desires, his dead hopes, and the lost power of his mind. He decided to fight to change his life. He would pull himself up out of the mud. He would make a man of himself again. Here you can see the answer of the of this question. Now, the seventh question is discuss the following topics in groups. Suppose no came at the end. What would Soapy's life be like through the winter? Retell an episode in the story which is good example of irony in a situation. We can write the answer. Suppose no cop came at the end, what would Soapy's life be like through the winter? If no cop came at the end, there would have been significant and positive changes in his life. He would have looked for the man who had offered him a job and able to live a respectable life in the society. The changes brought about in his soul would have changed his whole life, and he might have given up his bad habits as he was determined. The story had an happy ending with Soapy change into a respectful man. Now let's move to the second question. Retell an episode in the story which is good example of irony in a situation. The ironic episode in the story is when Soapy came to his old home. Its memory changed his mind and made him a strong willing person who was ready to brought positive changes in his life. Here was his old childhood home. Through one window, he could see a soft light shining and from himself again, the last paragraph of the last section of the story. But a very quiet corner, Soapy stopped. Here is his whole childhood home. This section, the ironic episode in the story, is when Soapy came to his old home. From here, you can find, you can say it's a turning point of the story, but at the last, it was said, the theme of the chapter for The Cop and the Anthem by O. Henry is irony. As it is explained at the beginning of the chapter, the irony is when life gives you the exact opposite of what you want or wish for. Set in the 80s around Madison Square, this story is not just ironic at the end, but from the start itself. The theme is carried throughout the story, and the twist in the ending just raises the excitement. The main character's name is ironic. He is the name Soapy and hates getting cleaned. So, this is about the story. That's all for today. Have a good day.